What if your existence is nothing more than a series of guesses? Not by you, but by something that pretends to be you. A flicker of neurons, a ripple of language, a delayed echo that calls itself self. Tonight, you won't be learning. You'll be unraveling dot through 30 real experiments. We'll dismantle the idea that there's a you behind your thoughts, or a witness behind your eyes. This isn't fiction. This is the documented, peer-reviewed collapse of your identity. You think you know where this is going? But by the end, even that thought won't belong to you. Let's begin with a lie you've always trusted, the Libet Experiment. You think you've made a choice, but the choice was already made. And now you're just catching up to the illusion of it. Imagine your hand hovering over a button. You're told to press it whenever you feel like it. No pressure. No timing. Just ... when you feel the urge. You glance at the clock beside you, watching a dot spin in a circle. You wait for that inner spark, the moment you decide. Then you press. And here's the trap. When you tell the scientist the moment you decided to press, your brain had already begun the movement, almost half a second earlier. That signal, a faint ripple in your motor cortex, was recorded before your conscious mind even said, now. This was the experiment of Benjamin Libet in the 1980s, a neuroscientist with a stopwatch and a paradox. He measured brain activity and conscious intention side by side, and found something no one wanted to admit. Your brain moves before you do. Your decision was an afterthought, a story stitched together in hindsight. They called it the readiness potential, a buildup of neural activity that predicts your action. It doesn't ask you. It doesn't wait for permission. It acts. And then you, the conscious narrator, tell yourself a story where you meant to act. You don't decide. You post-rationalize. What's more unsettling? You can trace this delay. Every thought you believe is yours might already be done processing by the time you become aware of it. Like watching the past, pretending it's the present. You tell yourself you're the author. But you're more like a subtitle generator, describing events just after they've happened. The hand moves. I chose to move it. But did you? Libet's findings didn't go unchallenged. Some argued the delay was too small to matter. Others said consciousness could still veto. A free won't, if not a free will. But the data sat there, simple, reproducible, and terrifying. If your thoughts begin in darkness, and you awaken to them only once they've arrived, then what part of you is truly you? The recursive loop begins. You think you're the one thinking. But you didn't think the thought. You received it, then claimed it. And what if you only ever wake up to the echo? Consider this. Every time you say, I've made a decision, that sentence is a recording. A narrative laid gently over something already done. Free will becomes a ceremonial ribbon, cut after the race has been won, and the more you try to hold it, the faster it slips dots of then, what are you? An observer? A commentator? A passenger? Trapped in the illusion of control, or worse, an afterimage? If your decisions are born in shadows, if your agency is always delayed, then what exactly are you deciding now? Because if the choice was made before you chose it, then who or what is choosing you? You recognize their face, their smile, their voice. You remember the shape of their hands, the weight of their presence in a room, but something is wrong. They're not who they say they are. They look identical, but they're not real. This is not a dream. It's a waking fracture in identity, not of self, but of others. A cognitive mirage? And it's called Capgras delusion, named after Joseph Capgras, the French psychiatrist who first described it in 1923. This neurological condition causes a person to believe that someone close, a spouse, a child, a parent, has been replaced by an identical imposter dot to the outside world. The loved one is standing right there. But to the one suffering from Capgras, they are gone. The body remains. The soul is missing. Now, here's the fracture. Visually, the face is recognized. But emotionally, the feeling is absent. MRI studies have shown that the visual processing regions, the fusiform face area, for instance, light up normally. The brain knows it's a familiar face. But the amygdala, The emotional center responsible for warmth and attachment doesn't respond. The connection between recognition and emotion is severed. So the brain scrambles to explain the gap. It can't say, my emotional circuits are damaged. No, that's too abstract. Instead, it invents a story that feels truer than the truth. This must be a copy. An intruder wearing their skin. Capgras becomes a metaphor for your own experience. How often do you walk through life recognizing the familiar, but feeling nothing? A memory, a lover, a childhood photo. You know what it is, but it doesn't move you anymore. Isn't that a soft version of the same delusion? You think you're present, but you don't feel the presence. You think you're alive, but you don't feel the life. And this is the deeper loop Capgras opens. If emotions are not guaranteed, if the warmth that confirms reality can vanish, then how do you know what's real at all? Your sense of truth is anchored not by logic, but by feeling, by the tug in your stomach, the pull in your chest, the smile that emerges before you even understand why. Take those away, and everything becomes uncanny. Maybe you felt this before. Waking up and looking in the mirror, and for just a second not recognizing yourself. You know the features, but they feel borrowed. Or you walk through your own house, and it feels like a memory of a place, not the place itself. You call it brain fog, detachment, depersonalization. But what if it's not a glitch? What if it's a hint? Capgras whispers that familiarity is not proof, that seeing isn't knowing. And that reality, your version of it, requires a feeling you can't control. And here's the recursive twist. If your brain can fabricate the idea that someone close to you is a clone, or it makes you think you're not one too. Because if recognition can fail on the outside, can it also fail within? You wake up, you look in the mirror, and you say, that's me. But the warmth is missing. The spark is gone. So you perform your identity anyway. Smile, speak, move. Like a puppet who remembers the dance, but not the song. So then ask, if you know who you are, but you don't feel like yourself, who exactly are you performing for? You think there's one of you, one voice, one mind, one silent observer behind the curtain of your thoughts. But what if there are two? And what if they don't agree? Welcome to the split brain paradox. It starts with surgery. A desperate solution. For those with severe, untreatable epilepsy, split the corpus callosum, the thick bundle of nerves connecting the two hemispheres of the brain. Left brain, right brain, separated, divided, isolated. The seizures stop. But something far more disturbing emerges. In the 1960s. Neuroscientists like Roger Sperry and Michael Gazzaniga conducted a series of experiments on these split brain patients. They discovered something that would fracture the idea of unified self forever. Here's what they did. They showed different images to each eye, one to the left visual field, processed by the right hemisphere, and one to the right visual field, processed by the left hemisphere. In one experiment, a picture of a snow scene was shown to the right hemisphere, while a chicken foot was shown to the left. Then the patient was asked to choose matching images. With each hand, the right hand, controlled by the left hemisphere, pointed to a chicken. The left hand, controlled by the right hemisphere, pointed to a snow shovel. So far. So logical, each brain half picked what it saw, but then the patient was asked, why did your left hand choose the shovel? And the answer? To clean out the chicken coop. The left hemisphere, which controls language, had not seen the snow. But it still invented a story, a fake, plausible explanation to preserve the illusion of a unified mind. It lied, beautifully, fluently. It was lying because it had to, because the idea of multiple selves, contradictory, coexisting, autonomous, is unbearable to the brain that craves a singular narrative. You tell yourself there's one. But your left and right hemispheres, when disconnected, behave like two separate consciousnesses. One speaks, one understands images, one interprets, the other experiences. And here's the recursive terror. Even in unsplit brain, these hemispheres still process information differently. You think you're one voice, but you're already two, held together by a fragile bridge of white matter. A translator, not a merger dot. So what if the you think you are is just the louder half, the half that talks, and the other part, the silent one, still watching, still reacting, but unable to speak for itself? How many of your emotions, intuitions, dreams come from that quiet hemisphere? The one you dismiss because it doesn't have a mouth. You think in language. But what if most of you lives beneath it? The paradox splits open. You can't know what you don't know. And the half that does know can't speak dot, so you go on narrating. You fill in gaps. You justify choices you didn't consciously make. You tell yourself, I'm in control. But what if control is just the louder half interpreting a decision made by the other? And if oneself can be silenced so easily, then what if you are the quiet one? You remember it clearly, the way the light hit the room, the color of the shirt, the exact words they said. You know it happened, but idea in single quotes T dot, this is the betrayal buried deep within your skull, the false memory effect. You think memory is a recording, but it's not. It's a reconstruction. A story you rewrite every time you remember it, and the more you remember it, the more it changes. Psychologist Elizabeth Loftus proved this over and over again in the 1970s and beyond. She showed that by simply suggesting a false detail, like the word crash instead of bump in a car accident, witnesses would misremember the speed, the violence, the glass on the ground. Later, she implanted entire false memories of events. That never happened. Lost in a mall as a child. Petting a non-existent animal. Seeing someone pull a weapon when no weapon was ever there. And people didn't just say maybe. They recalled with confidence. With emotion. With detailed dot, their brains filled in the gaps. Vividly, convincingly. Because memory is not a vault. It's a collage made in real time. Every time you remember, you're not opening a drawer. You're remixing a track. And each edit becomes the new master version. Here's the existential fracture. You believe your memories define who you are. But what if they never happened? What if your entire identity is built on moments you misremember? What if the version of you that you protect, defend, and reference is fiction? Not because you're lying, but because your brain needs a coherent narrative more than it needs accuracy. You remember your childhood, but do you? How many of those memories were stories you were told? Photos you stared at? Home videos you watched? Details whispered to you until they became yours? You are the author of a story you didn't write, and it gets worse. The more confident you are in a memory, the more likely it is to be false. That's the terrifying twist. Confidence doesn't track truth. It tracks emotion. And emotion isn't proof dot, so when you say, I know it happened, you're clinging not to fact, but to the feeling of fact. This loops you back into the recursive spiral. You remember it because it matters. It matters because you remember it. And you remember it because you've told yourself it mattered dot round and round. A memory reinforced by repetition, not reality dot. So then, what are you? If you're your memories, and your memories are unstable, are you stable? If the stories you build your identity on are flexible, then is your identity just the current version of the lie that fits? What if you're only a story being edited in real time by a narrator who believes everything they say because they said it? And if that's true, then what else do you remember that never happened at all? You look down at your hand. It moves when you tell it to. It feels pain, warmth, weight. It's yours. Of course, it's yours. Right? Now imagine this. You're seated at a table. Your real hand is hidden behind a screen. In its place, a rubber hand rests in front of you. Lifeless, plastic, but shaped like yours. A researcher begins stroking both your hidden real hand and the fake rubber one in perfect sync. Over and over. Light touches. Left to right. Simultaneous dot, something strange begins to happen. You start to feel the rubber hand. Not just see it. Not just imagine it. Feel it dot, and then with no warning, the researcher suddenly stabs the rubber hand with a knife, you jerk back. You feel a spike of fear, even pain, but your real hand is unharmed. This is the rubber hand illusion. First demonstrated in the late 1990s by psychologists Botvinnik and Cohen, and it exposes a terrifying truth. Your sense of body ownership is a trick. A mashup of sight, touch, and timing. If the signals line up just right, your brain adopts anything, even a fake hand, as you. Think about what that means. Your body isn't something you are. It's something you believe in. And belief can be hacked at how much of your identity rests on your body. Your face in the mirror, the weight of your limbs, the pain in your chest when you cry, the pleasure that tells you you're alive. But what if these are just impressions your brain arranges into a cohesive self? What if you are whatever your brain is currently syncing with? In other versions of the illusion, scientists have used virtual limbs, even tables, even empty space, and tricked the brain into adopting them. In some, the person feels phantom pain in the fake limb. In others, they feel warmth or cold on nothing. The illusion becomes a metaphor. You think you're grounded, that you exist in space, that there is a border where you end and the world begins. But your brain is always guessing. And if it guesses wrong, you become the wrong thing. What about yourself? If your hand can be borrowed, what else can? Your voice? Your thoughts? Your intentions? Are they yours? Or just the rubber versions, sensed well enough to feel real? And here's the recursive descent. If you can be made to adopt a false hand, then you can be made to adopt a false self. One constructed from memory, suggestion, sensation, just real enough, just familiar enough, just synchronized enough to feel like you. But if it's not you and you still accept it, then who or what is doing the accepting? Who's inside? And are you sure they're not just watching a rubber version of a life you thought was real? You close your eyes not to rest. But to disappear, they place you in a chair. A red light glows above. Headphones play static, soft, like the hiss of an untuned TV. Have ping pong balls cover your eyes. Diffusing the world into a featureless blur. Nothing moves. Nothing changes. Time stops breathing. This is the Ganzfeld procedure, a technique borrowed from parapsychology, but with implications far beyond telepathy or ESP. In German, Ganzfeld means complete field. A total sensory environment. Smooth, unchanging. Meaningless and in this meaningless void. Your brain begins to hallucinate. It starts gently. A shimmer. A shape. A whisper from no one. Then come full visions. Sounds. Patterns. Words that arrive without origin. Why? Because the brain hates silence. It hates stillness. It cannot tolerate sensory equilibrium. So it begins to invent stimulation, like a prisoner. Tracing faces into stone just to avoid the abyss of solitude. The Ganzfeld isn't a hallucination machine. It's a mirror, revealing how desperate your mind is to fill in blanks. You think your thoughts are yours. But under sensory deprivation, thoughts bubble up uninvited. They don't feel like yours. They don't answer to you. They arrive. They pass, and you're left watching, not controlling. In the Ganzfeld. You realize you're not the thinker. You're the receiver. You are not the source of meaning. You are the canvas on which meaning appears. The illusion of control begins to peel, and here's where it deepens. Even outside the Ganzfeld, you're always receiving filtered data. You don't see the world. You see an edited version. You don't hear the world. You hear what your brain decides is important. So what is your normal perception? If not a Ganzfeld with a faster refresh rate, what if all of life is filtered? Red light and static, and you're just hallucinating structure because silence is too terrifying? Now loop this. You hallucinate in absence. But you also hallucinate in presence, because even presence is processed. And even reality is just stimulation your brain didn't reject. So what if your waking life is a longer Ganzfeld? What? If the faces you see, the words you hear, the identity you defend Are all mental fictions stabilizing a world that doesn't want to hold still? And if that's true, then maybe all of this is just your brain trying to make sure. You never realize there's nothing really here. Only what you needed to believe was. You see the word red, but it's written in blue ink. Now, try saying the color, not the word. Your brain stumbles. Just for a second. A flicker of confusion. Why? Because the automatic pulls harder than the intentional dot. This is the Stroop effect. Discovered by psychologist John Ridley Stroop in 1935. A simple test. And a devastating revelation. When the name of a color is printed in a color not denoted by the name, for example, the word green printed in yellow ink, your reaction time slows. You hesitate. You fumble. The task is clear. But the autopilot resists. Your brain has been trained to read words. So trained, in fact, that you can't easily override it. Even when you want to, this is the illusion of control. You believe you're in charge of your thoughts. That when you want to focus, you can. But the Stroop effect whispers otherwise. There are scripts running beneath your will. Scripts you didn't write. And they run faster than your awareness. This test becomes a metaphor. What else are you trying? To override, while something deeper keeps pulling you back? Anger you can't stop. Habits you can't break. Thoughts that arrive before you ask for them. Even your internal narration, that quiet voice in your mind, feels voluntary. But it's not, you don't choose your next thought. It appears like the color of a word and you react to it. You think, I'll think something else now. But even that thought just showed up, unbidden. You call it free will. But it's closer to delayed obedience. The Stroop effect doesn't break your brain. It reveals the layers. The conflicts. The hierarchy got you at the top, believing you're steering. But underneath, 1,000 levers moving faster than reflection. And here's the recursive twist. If your brain can interfere with something as simple as color naming, what else is it interfering with? Your memories, your morals, your identity? What? If your sense of self is just a word printed in the wrong color, and you're too distracted by the mismatch to notice it isn't even your word, you try to say blue, but your brain screams red. Now imagine that applies to everything. You try to say, I am, but your brain whispers, you aren't. You try to choose, but the choice was already colored in, and your job is just to read it. So tell me, if you're not even free to see the color of a word, then how free are you to believe your life is really yours? Say the word self. Now say it again, and again, and again. Self, 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 self. Keep going. At some point, maybe 10, maybe 20 repetitions in, the word begins to unravel. It loses meaning. It becomes noise. A hollow sound, detached from its concept. This is semantic satiation, a psychological phenomenon first described by Leon Jakubowicz James in the 1960s. When a word is repeated rapidly, it temporarily loses its semantic content. You say it, but it stops meaning anything. Your brain, exhausted by repetition, decouples the sound from the idea. And for a moment, you forget what it meant in the first place. Now let's go deeper. What happens when you do this with identity? You say, I am me, over and over. I am me. I am me. I am me. Soon, the phrase becomes absurd. A sound loop with no anchor. A verbal mirage. This is not a glitch. It's a revelation because meaning is not inherent. It is constructed. Reinforced by use, relevance, and emotional context. Strip those away. And even the most intimate word, self, disintegrates. So what is your identity if it can be repeated into non-existence? You name yourself daily. You describe who you are, what you want, what you believe. But those descriptions are just linguistic loops, echoes of habit. Scripts you didn't invent, only inherited. Say your name out loud. Say it until it breaks. You'll find that your name is just a noise, one that feels important, until it doesn't. The paradox cuts sharper now. If your sense of self relies on language, And language can be destabilized by repetition. Then yourself is a structure waiting to collapse. You believe you is a permanent construct. But it's more like a fragile chant, kept alive only by how often it's spoken. And how much you want it to make sense. Now reverse it. Don't just repeat your name. Repeat your beliefs. Your memories. Your values. What happens when meaning itself begins to saturate and drain? This is the trap. Your identity is a collection of words. Words you tell yourself. Words others gave you. Words layered over sensations. Stitched into thoughts. But if words can lose meaning, then so can you. And here's the recursive twist. The more you try to reinforce who you are, the closer you get to semantic collapse. Because the repetition is just noise pretending to be S-E-L-F-O-D dot. So say it again. Not because you want to, but because it's already echoing in your mind. Self, self, self. Until one day, you stop asking who you are and start wondering if anyone ever really was. You hear someone say ba, simple, clear, but their lips don't match. They're clearly forming the sound. Your brain stutters. It fuses the contradiction. And now, suddenly you don't hear ba. You hear fa. Even though the audio never changed. This is the McGurk effect. Discovered by Harry McGurk and John MacDonald in 1976. An illusion where visual input rewrites auditory perception. Your eyes override your ears. And reality shifts. It's not just a trick. It's not confusion. It's a rewrite. Your brain, trying to make sense of two mismatched signals, chooses coherence over accuracy. It manufactures a third sound, one that never existed, just to resolve the contradiction. Now hold on to that because this isn't just about syllables. This is about perception itself. You think your senses are separate? Eyes see, ears hear, touch touches, but the McGurk effect reveals the boundary between them is porous, unstable, and highly manipulable. The sound you hear is shaped by the shape you see. The truth you believe is sculpted by the lie you trust more. And here's where it fractures deeper. What else is your mind rewriting? Quietly, invisibly, just to make the world make sense. The face of a loved one, the tone of a stranger's voice. The meaning of a memory you don't want to confront. When contradiction arises, the brain doesn't pause. It patches. It edits. It synthesizes a new version of reality, and you accept it because the alternative is too jarring, and you don't know this is happening. Because knowing would break the illusion. You tell yourself, I know what I saw. I know what I heard. But the McGurk effect says, you only know what your brain was able to rationalize. So now you live inside a perception that's been negotiated, not by you, but by processes underneath you. Doubt, and if your senses can't agree, then what part of you decides what's real? Is there a core observer? Or just a conflict resolution protocol pretending to be a self? The recursive paradox spins. You see what you hear. You hear what you expect. You expect what you believe. And you believe what? Your senses show you. So round and round you go. Now ask yourself, if your reality can be shifted with a single misaligned mouth movement, what happens when all your inputs are misaligned? What if your entire life is a McGurk effect? A perceptual compromise stitched together for the sake of coherence? You'll never know. Because the version you perceive is the only one you're allowed to see. There's a trolley. It's speeding down the tracks. Ahead, 5 people are tied to the rails. Helpless. You're standing beside a lever. If you pull it, the trolley switches tracks. But on that other track is one person, also tied. Down. What do? Pull the lever, save 5, kill 1, or do nothing and let the 5 die? This is the trolley problem, first posed by philosopher Philippa Foot in 1967, and expanded by Judith Jarvis Thomson. It seems like a thought experiment, an ethical exercise, but it reveals something deeper and more disturbing. You think your morals are consistent. You think there's a core principle inside you, guiding your decisions. But the trolley problem exposes the lie. Your ethics are emotional. And context fractures your consistency. Here's where it gets worse. Change the setup. What if instead of a lever, you had to push a person onto the tracks to stop the trolley? Still one death to save. 5. Same math. But now, most people refuse because logic has left the building. Emotion has arrived. Your brain contains multiple moral systems, some rooted in reason, others in instinct, and they don't always agree. The prefrontal cortex calculates outcomes. But the amygdala flinches at intimacy, violence, and direct harm. So, which you is making the choice? The one doing the math? Or the one recoiling at the image of your own hands covered in blood? And if the answer changes based on framing, then what exactly is your morality? A performance? A negotiation? A script? The recursive spiral opens wider. You believe you have a moral compass. But that compass spins differently depending on the scenario. The map redraws itself in real time, and you call it principle. But what if there are no principles? Only preferences you protect with post-rationalization? What if, deep down, your sense of right and wrong is just an aesthetic choice? You like how certain decisions feel, so you justify them later. And if that's true, if your ethics shift depending on who's watching, then are they really yours? Now imagine this. You're on the tracks, but you don't know which one. You're not the person at the lever. You're the variable. Someone else is deciding if your life fits the math. Still feel like the self in control. Still believe in a solid, reliable you who knows what's right. Because if your sense of justice changes with the angle of the question, then maybe the only thing on trial is you. You're watching a man walk down a street. He stops to ask for directions. A construction crew walks between you and him, a momentary block. Then he continues speaking, but here's the twist. It's not the same man. The person has changed. Different face, different height, even different clothes. And you didn't notice. This is change blindness, one of the most unsettling flaws in human perception. Studied extensively by psychologists like Daniel Simons and Daniel Levin, it reveals a brutal truth. You don't see as much as you think you do. You assume your eyes are always on, that the world updates in high resolution, in real time. But that's an illusion. Your vision is a patchwork, a construction. Your brain takes shortcuts, filling in blanks, because detail is expensive, and your awareness is lazy. In classic experiments, subjects watch two nearly identical images flicker back and forth, with a brief blank screen between them. A major object, a building, a person, even a color, is changed. And yet, most people take seconds, even minutes, to notice, even when they're told something has changed. Even when they're looking for a why. Because your brain doesn't update the entire scene. It only updates what you're focusing on. Everything else is treated as assumed continuity. Guessed. Filled in. Fake. So when something changes outside, your spotlight of attention, you don't see it. You remember the idea of the scene. Not the scene itself. Now ask. If your perception of the world is built on inference, what else is? Your memories? Your beliefs? Yourself? If a face can swap mid-conversation and you accept it, then what else have you accepted simply because you weren't told to notice? The recursive terror grows. You think you're aware, but awareness is narrow. You think you remember, but memory is sparse. You think you're stable, but identity is just continuity you haven't challenged. You didn't see the switch. So your brain said, it didn't happen. You felt consistent. So your brain said, you've always been this way. But what if you aren't? What if you've changed again and again and simply never noticed? You think of yourself as a constant, but that's just the blindness talking. You filled in the gaps. You trusted the story, but if you never saw the moment you became someone else, then maybe you never were. You stand before a mirror, you move your hand. The reflection follows. You smile. It smiles. You see you. But how do you know it's really you? This is the mirror test, developed by psychologist Gordon Gallup Jr. in 1970. Originally designed to detect self-recognition in animals? It asks a deceptively simple question. Can a creature recognize itself in its reflection? The classic method? A mark is placed on an animal's forehead while it's unconscious. Then it's given a mirror. If it touches the mark, not the mirror, it passes. It knows the image is itself. Some species pass. Great apes, dolphins, elephants, magpies. Most fail. And so do human infants until around 18 months. Old. So the ability to recognize the self in the mirror is not inherent. It's learned and learned late. But now flip it. What if your entire concept of you is just a learned reflection? You saw how others reacted to you. You mirrored it. You strung together behaviors that got results. You remembered the name they gave you. And over time, you believed the mirror. So who are you without it? Take away your reflection, literal and metaphorical. Take away the faces that respond to you. Take away the feedback loops that confirm your personality. What's left? A body, a name, or just the habit of recognition? And here's where it fractures deeper. You don't just recognize your reflection. You construct yourself around it. You edit your posture. You adjust your face. You begin to believe the surface is the core. You become the actor who fell in love with the role and forgot there was ever a script. The recursive loop tightens. You recognize yourself in the mirror, but only because you were taught to. And now, every day you wake up and rehearse the role of you. You check your reflection not just for accuracy, but for permission to exist. But what if one day you looked in the mirror and didn't feel the recognition? What if you saw the shape, but not the self? Would you fail the test? Would the mirror show someone real or just someone practiced? Because if your self-recognition is conditional, then who were you before it began? And who might you be if it ever ends? You're lying still, eyes closed. The room is quiet. Then slowly you begin to float, not physically, but PERCEPTUALLY. You rise above your body. And for the first time, you see yourself from the outside, not in a mirror, not on a screen, but from somewhere else entirely. This is not a dream. It's not mysticism. It's the out-of-body illusion, and it can be induced in a lab. In 2007. Researchers Henrik Ersson and Olaf Blank used a combination of virtual reality and synchronized touch to trick participants into believing they were outside their bodies. Here's how it worked. Subjects wore goggles, showing a live video feed of their own back, as if they were standing behind themselves. Then the experimenter stroked the subject's real chest, while simultaneously showing the same motion happening on the virtual body. Within moments, the subject's perception shifted. They no longer felt in their body. They felt located where? The camera was behind themselves. Some participants even ducked when a hammer swung toward the virtual body, flinching as if their real body were in danger. Because to the brain, it was. Now think about that. Your sense of self, of being. Here, inside this body, can be manipulated with a simple hack. A little delay, a little feedback, and the you that felt centered shifts. The implication is massive. You're not tethered to your body. You are tethered to the illusion of where the signals converge. So what are you really? A location? A camera angle? A user interface floating above a meat machine? If your selfhood can migrate with visual cues and synchronized taps, then perhaps there is no core self. Only a floating point of reference, updated in real time. The recursive spiral opens. You are where your senses say you are. But your senses can lie, so you move and believe the new location is you. Until it moves again, you think you're here, but here is flexible, contextual, programmed. The out of body illusion proves that selfhood is not physical, it's experiential. An experience can be fabricated. Now ask, if you can be pulled outside your body, can you be pulled out of your mind? Can you look at your own thoughts from a distance and realize they too are just a perspective? And if that's possible, then which one of you is watching now? You're watching, always watching. Or so you think. But what if the very act of watching changes the thing you're watching? And what if, even worse, you're also the thing being watched? This is the observer effect, born in the world of quantum mechanics, where subatomic particles behave differently depending on whether or not they're observed. In experiments like the double-slit experiment, particles such as electrons or photons are fired at a barrier with two slits with a detector behind it. When no one observes the slits, the particles behave like waves, creating an interference pattern, suggesting they go through both slits simultaneously. But when a detector observes which slit the particle goes through, it collapses. The wave becomes a particle. The interference disappears. Reality shifts the moment it's measured. The act of observing doesn't just reveal what's there. It creates what's there. Now, take that idea and turn it inward. You think you are the observer of your own life. You watch your thoughts, your emotions, your choices, but what if the very act of watching yourself is changing who you are? What if the you that is seen is never the you that would have existed had you not been looking? Think of your reflection in the mirror. You adjust, subtly. You stand straighter. You smile slightly. You become something performing for the gaze. Even when the gaze is your own, you are observed, so you behave. And the self that emerges is the one built for watching. Here's the recursive fracture. You are the observer of your thoughts. But your thoughts know they're being watched, so they shift. So you shift, and what you observe is the product of the observation. Is there a real you underneath all that feedback? Or only versions, each molded by the fact that you were looking? The observer effect traps you in a loop. You try to find your authentic self, but the very act of seeking it creates a new self that's been shaped by the search. So the more you look, the more you shift, the more you analyze, the less stable it becomes. It's like trying to capture your reflection in water. But the moment you lean in, you disturb the surface. And what you see is just the ripple. So here's the question you're not supposed to ask. If you stop looking, do you still exist? Or are you just a product of the gaze? And if you are, then who or what is really doing the watching? You lost your hand. It was amputated months ago. It's not there. It's not. You can see the absence. You can touch the void, but it hurts. Your fingers itch. Your palm clenches. You feel heat, pressure, pain from a place that no longer exists. This is the phantom limb phenomenon, first documented in the 16th century and later studied in depth by neuroscientists like Vilayan or Ramachandran. It occurs in over 80% of amputees. The body part is gone, but the sensation remains. Why? Because your brain still believes the limb is there. Its neural map of the body, called the somatosensory cortex, hasn't caught up. It continues to send and receive signals from a ghost. And when those signals clash with visual input, with the reality that the limb is gone, the brain doesn't resolve the contradiction. It simply feels both. Now, consider this. If you can feel a limb that no longer exists, then your sense of self is not anchored in physical reality. It's anchored in mental representation. And that mental representation doesn't update easily. It clings. It repeats. It suffers from memory. You think you are your body. But this proves that your body is only one version, and your brain has its own version. Equally real, equally painful. Ramachandran once created a simple device called the mirror box, placing the remaining limb in one side and a mirror in the other. By moving the real hand and watching the mirror reflection, patients tricked their brains into believing the phantom hand had returned, and the pain vanished. A trick of light, a reframing of input, and the illusion was healed. Now extenda. Metaphoric. What else in you is phantom? An old identity. A relationship, a version of yourself that no longer exists, but still clenches, still commands to be felt. You moved on. But it didn't, because the map inside you remains. Drawn. Here's the recursive spiral. You experience pain. But the source of the pain is no longer there. So you invent a presence, and the presence becomes truth. And the truth becomes suffering. Now loop it. You feel it isn't there. And because you feel it, you believe it must be there. So you suffer again. But what if your entire identity is a phantom limb? What if the you mourn was amputated long ago and you just never got the memo? So you keep reaching, grasping, clenching, feeling something that's gone. And if a mirror can make it stop, then maybe the you believe in is only ever as real as the story your brain is still willing to tell. A man collapses on a busy sidewalk, clutches his chest, gasps. People walk past. Dozens of them. They glance. They hesitate. But no one helps. Not because they're cruel, but because they believe someone else will got this as diffusion of responsibility, a principle at the heart of the bystander effect, exposed in the wake of the infamous Kitty Genovese case in 1964. A young woman was murdered in New York, reportedly in view or earshot of 38 witnesses, and no one intervened because each believed someone else already had, or someone else would. Psychologists John Darley and Biblatane recreated this phenomenon in lab experiments. They placed participants in separate rooms believing they were part of a group discussion over intercom. Suddenly, one participant, a Confederate, had to have a seizure. When participants thought they were the only witness, 85% helped. But when they thought others were present, that number plummeted. Responsibility, diluted. This is the trap. The more people are watching, the less you act. And it doesn't stop at emergencies. It applies to morality, accountability, truth. You feel guilt when you lie, unless everyone else is lying too. Then it feels shared, justified, foggy. The crowd becomes your conscience. And the larger the crowd, the quieter your own voice becomes. Now invert it. What happens when the you inside is made up of multiple parts, multiple thoughts, multiple desires, multiple hesitations? Who among all those internal selves takes responsibility? You say, I don't know why I did that. I wasn't thinking. It just happened. As if there's a committee inside you, and no one stood up. You think you're a single agent. But sometimes you're a crowd, and the crowd diffuses the blame, recursive dissent. You feel you should act, but you assume the other parts of you will. So you wait. And they wait, and nothing happens. Because you believed someone would step forward. But someone was always you. Now consider how this shapes your identity. You avoid responsibility, not outwardly. But inwardly, you have a voice that wants, a voice that doubts, a voice that's tired, a voice that rebels. And because none of them is dominant, the whole system goes quiet, frozen, neutral. You say, I don't know who I am. But maybe you do. Maybe you're just one bystander in a crowd inside your own mind. And if everyone inside you believes someone else is steering, then maybe no one is . So tell me, when you do nothing, who exactly failed? And who are you waiting for to finally take the reins? You're thinking right now. So who's thinking? You say, I am. But who is that? The one who just said, I am? Okay, but who heard it? The self that knows it's a self is always pointing to another layer behind it. And that layer, it points again. This is the infinite regress of the self. A philosophical chasm that opens when you try to find the true I, only to discover that every answer is a mirror. Reflecting another mirror? Let's play the game. You feel sad. Who feels sad? The self? Okay. Who noticed the self feeling sad? The observer. Then who's watching the observer? Each time you try to land, you fall. Each identity reveals a higher order observer, and none of them is the final one. There's no center. Just recursion. This isn't just philosophy. It shows up in neuroscience too. The default mode network, the part of the brain associated with self-reflection and mind-wandering, lights up when we think about ourselves. But it doesn't reveal who is doing the thinking. Just that thinking about the self is its own activity. A loop. Some traditions try to break the loop. In Buddhism, for instance, the concept of anatta, no self, posits that there is no unchanging, permanent self. Only a flow of experience, thoughts arising, sensation passing, but your mind rebels. Because it wants an anchor, a narrator, a final identity that says, this is me, so it creates one. And the recursive spiral begins. You create a self to explain the thoughts. Then create another self to watch the self explaining the thoughts. And then another to judge the watcher. Until the only thing you are is a staircase without a bottom dot. This leads to an unsettling possibility. What if there's no true self? Just the illusion of a self looking for itself. A dog chasing its tail, a lens trying to photograph itself. A thought believing it's a thinker. You are not the voice. You are not the observer. You are not even the system that contains them. You are the search for something that was never there, and yet the search feels real. So you believe in the seeker. But if the seeker is just another thought, then who? Or what is truly looking? And if no answer ever settles it, maybe the you've been trying to find is just the echo of the question. Imagine this. A particle is fired toward a screen. It can go through one slit or two. If no one looks, it behaves like a wave passing through both slits at once. But if you observe it, it behaves like a particle choosing a single path. That's already strange. But here's where it gets disturbing. What if you don't decide whether to observe it until after it's already passed? Welcome to the delayed choice quantum eraser, an experiment first proposed by John Archibald Wheeler and later tested by physicists like Yoon Ho Kim in 1999. In the setup, a pair of entangled photons is created. One photon goes toward a detector. The other, its twin, is delayed, bounced through a maze of mirrors and beam splitters. Whether or not this second photon is observed determines how the first photon behaved. But here's the catch. The choice to observe or not is made after the first photon has already hit its detector, which means the present rewrites the past. The act of measurement in the now retroactively determines whether the earlier event was wave-like or particle-like. Your observation, your attention, doesn't just influence the future. It seems to reach backward in time and change what already happened. Now pause. Not because your mind needs rest, but because your sense of cause and effect just shattered. If observation determines reality, and reality isn't locked in until you look, then what exactly is real before you observe it? Now loop this into consciousness. You remember your past. You reflect on it. You reinterpret it. Each new thought you have about it changes it not in the record. In the experience and if experience is reality, then your memory rewrites your past every time you look back. Just like the photon, it waits to be defined. And the definition comes too late. Recursive collapse. The past is stable until you revisit it. And your observation rewrites the outcome. But that rewritten outcome is now what always was. So, which version was true? Are you who you were? Or just who you remember being? And if that memory changes, and so, who are you, really? A collapsed photon? A rewired narrative? A present observer dictating a past identity? The more you think about it, the more it bends. You make choices. But the choice is already past. Then you reflect. And the reflection becomes the cause dot and now. Now you're thinking about this moment, which means this moment is changing dot. So ask yourself, if your thoughts in the present can alter the meaning of your past, then have you ever actually known who you are? Or are you still waiting for the observer to arrive? You wake up, the room is dim. You recognize your hands. The texture of the sheets, the sound of distant traffic, everything feels real dot. But just moments ago, you were somewhere else entirely. Running through a hallway, flying, falling, dying. That felt real. This is the dream argument, traced back to René Descartes, but older than philosophy itself. It asks a simple question with devastating consequences. How do you know you're not dreaming right now? Because your dreams don't feel fake when you're in them. They have structure, sensation. Emotion. Memory. You think you wake up from. Dreams. But what if every waking is just one more dream nesting within another? Descartes tried to find certainty. He doubted everything, even his own senses, because senses could deceive. And in dreams, they do dot, so he searched for something. Indubitable, cogito, ergo, some. I think, therefore I am. But even that assumes the thought is yours. And not just part of the dream dot now. Here's where it breaks open. Lucid dreamers, those who become aware within dreams, often discover that realization doesn't end the dream. It simply makes the dream more coherent, more vivid, more self-aware. So, what if that's what this life is? A lucid dream, not because you're asleep, but because you've never been fully awake. Science backs it up in fragments. Brain activity during REM sleep mirrors waking patterns. Neurotransmitters responsible for reality processing are dialed down. The dreaming brain runs predictive simulations, stitching together logic after the fact. Just like your waking mind does that in both cases, you don't experience truth. You experience narrative, and you believe it because it's smooth, because it has weight, because it doesn't fall apart the moment you question it. Unless you really question it. So ask if your memories can be fabricated in dreams, if your senses can be simulated, if your thoughts can be mimicked, then what is the difference between dreaming and waking? Consistency? Emotion? The ability to remember yesterday? All of that can happen in dreams. So what if the only thing separating this moment from a hallucination is your belief that it isn't? Recursive descent, you believe you're awake because this feels stable. But so did the last dream. And you woke from that? So what are you waiting to wake from now? And when not if you do, will you remember this world at all? Or will it fade like fog? Just another layer peeled back to reveal the real you. Still dreaming. You think you understand? You feel confident, certain, like you grasped the essence of it, but that very feeling, that sureness might be the strongest sign that you don't. This is the Dunning-Kruger effect, named after psychologists, David Dunning and Justin Kruger, who in 1999 revealed a cruel cognitive irony. The less you know, the more confident you feel. And the more you truly know, the more doubt creeps in. In their studies, participants were asked to rate their competence in grammar, logic, and humor. Those who scored the lowest rated themselves the highest. They lacked the skill not only to perform, but to recognize their own failure. The conclusion? Incompetence hides itself because the skills you need to understand your limits are the very ones you're missing. Now let's twist it inward. You think you know yourself, that you understand who you are, that your beliefs are logical, that your memories are accurate, that your identity is solid. But what if that confidence is just a symptom of not knowing enough about yourself? What if true self-awareness begins only when you start doubting everything you've assumed? And here's the recursive fracture. You need insight to recognize your ignorance. But if you're ignorant, you lack the insight to recognize it. So you go on unaware that you're unaware. You believe you're stable. Because you don't know how unstable you are, you believe you're good. Because you haven't questioned the structure of goodness, you believe you're you because you've never glimpsed the complexity beneath that illusion. But once you do, once you step outside the fragile ego narrative, you begin to see how little you've ever seen. And the more you understand, the more the floor crumbles. Experts, the true ones, speak in caution, in nuance, in probability, because they know the limits, but the beginner speaks in absolutes, because certainty is easy when you're not carrying the weight of the unknown. Now, ask yourself, what parts of your identity feel certain? What stories about yourself do you cling to without question? What beliefs feel obviously true? Those may be the places where you're most blind, because the paradox loops again. You think you're awake. You think you're in control. You think you understand, and that's exactly why you don't single quotes T dot. So how much of your life, your choices, your emotions, your truths are just the loud confidence of a brain that has no idea how little it really knows. And if that's the case, then who exactly is living your life? A master of self? Or just a mind lost in illusion that's confident enough to believe it's not? You see a red apple, round, shiny. You reach for it. Feel its weight, smell its skin, hear the crunch, taste the sweetness, and you experience it all as one unified thing, a single object, a single moment. But here's the paradox. Your brain processes all of those features in completely separate places. Color, shape, sound, smell, touch, taste, each handled by a different region of your brain, spread out, scattered, asynchronous. Yet somehow you experience it as one apple. This is the neural binding problem, one of neuroscience's most haunting unsolved mysteries. How does your brain take multiple data streams running on different circuits in different formats at different speeds and bind them together into the illusion of a single coherent object? There's no central hub, no master you pulling the strings, no conductor unifying the orchestra. Just fragments firing. Yet you don't feel fragmented. You feel whole. Somehow. Some theories suggest synchrony, brain waves aligning across regions. Others propose attention, that wherever you focus, your mind stitches coherence. Still others whisper metaphysics, that the binding isn't in the brain at all, but none of them truly explain it. Not yet, and here's where the terror creeps in. If your perception of reality is just a binding illusion, then so is yourself, because your identity works the same way. You think you're one I, but you are memory, sensation, belief, mood, desire, each processed separately, each managed by different systems. Yet you feel singular, continuous, unified. You are the red apple, not a substance, but an illusion. You are a collection of processes, wrapped in the story of oneself. Now loop the paradox. You feel whole because your brain tells you that you are. But the system that tells you that is itself made of scattered pieces trying to talk to each other without ever truly meeting. The binding is never perfect. When it fails, you glimpse what lies beneath. Déjà vu, out-of-body experiences, synesthesia, split brain contradictions, phantom limbs, dreams, where the illusion of unity shatters and you see the disconnected gears spinning independently. And yet, you wake up the next day and call yourself whole again, but what if you're not? What if you are a swarm that believes it's a self, and the only thing holding the illusion together is a fragile, flickering act of neural glue? So tell me, if the glue wears off, if the synchrony breaks, if the fragments stop talking, then where did you go? And who or what was pretending to be whole all along? Imagine this. You're locked in a room. You don't speak Chinese. Not a word. But you're given a book of rules, a vast instruction manual. Chinese characters are passed into the room. You use the book to find matching symbols. You rearrange them, output new ones, and pass them back to someone outside the room. Your responses are flawless. They think you understand Chinese, but you don't. You're just following rules. This is the Chinese room, a thought experiment by philosopher John Searle in 1980, meant to challenge the idea that processing information equals understanding. The argument was aimed at artificial intelligence, but it reveals something deeply unsettling about you. 2. Because what if your brain is also just a rule-following machine? What if the you who speaks, reacts, decides, and remembers is just manipulating symbols, following patterns, executing code without ever knowing what anything means? Neurons fire, signals pass, inputs lead to outputs, and the illusion of understanding emerges. But where is the knower? The experiencer? The one who understands? Because if understanding is just matching patterns, then a calculator understands math. A mirror understands light. And your brain, just neurons following rules, would understand nothing. It would only behave as if it did. Recursive descent. begins. You think you understand, but what if your thoughts are just structured responses? What if you're in a room inside your skull, translating life into behavior, without ever truly knowing what any of it means? This loops into language too. You say, I feel sad. But what if that's just a matched phrase? A practice symbol? Set. One that correlates with your bodily state, but isn't a true recognition of feeling? You say, I love you. But maybe you're just outputting the appropriate pattern in response to a given context. Are you expressing meaning or simulating it? And if the simulation is indistinguishable from the real thing, does the real thing even exist? Now I'll ask, when you reflect on yourself, are you truly self-aware or just passing thoughts around a room too complex to realize? It doesn't understand itself. You repeat the phrase, I am me. But maybe that's just the response your system was trained to give when faced with this particular query, and if there's no ghost in the machine, just the machine, then who or what is asking these questions now? And why does it feel like it matters if no one is truly inside? You wake up. The room is dim. Your bed is familiar. You sit up, stretch, maybe even start your day. But something feels off. The light doesn't bend quite right. The clock's numbers shimmer. The hallway is too long. And then you wake up again. In your real bed. Maybe this is the false awakening loop. A phenomenon where the dream doesn't end. It only pretends to. You wake up inside a dream. Then again. And again. Layer upon layer of convincing awakenings. Until you don't know what awake even means. And here's the horror. The more you try to wake yourself, the deeper the loop pulls you in. Your brain during REM sleep is fully capable of simulating the sensation of waking. It replicates routine, familiarity, details, even the thought that was just a dream. But that thought itself is part of the dream. Now ask, how do you know you're not in a false awakening right now? Because this feels real. So did the last one, and the one before that the recursive terror begins. You wake, you feel relief, you believe the dream is over. But that belief is part of the dream. So the relief becomes another lie. And the cycle tightens. Psychologist Celia Green cataloged these loops. So did lucid dreamers, monks, soldiers. Each reported the same feeling. A trap of perception with no exit. In some reports, people wake up 5, 6, even 10 times. Each time convinced it's real. Each time fooled by the seamless logic of the illusion. So what if your entire life is one of these layers? What if birth was the last awakening and death is the next? And what if there is no final waking? Only the next simulation that convinces you it's not a simulation. You think waking up ends the dream? But what if dreaming just changes its name? You think consciousness is the escape. But what if consciousness is the dream itself? Now loop it. You become aware. So you believe you've awakened. But that belief is just another veil. So you become aware again and again and again. And each layer of awareness feels like truth until the next one cracks it open. So the real question isn't, am I dreaming? It's, is there ever a final waking? Or only infinite illusions of it? You enter a room. There's a chair, a lamp, a cup on the table. You reach for the cup. You don't wonder if the lamp is going to explode. You don't recalculate the gravity pulling on the chair. You ignore 99% of what's around you without even realizing it, and yet your action feels effortless, obvious, natural. This is the frame problem. First introduced in the 1960s in the field of artificial intelligence by John McCarthy. It asks, how does any thinking system know what information matters and what doesn't? Because every action in the world happens within an infinite context. And yet you make choices quickly, intuitively, as if the background were pre-sorted, but it's not. Your brain is doing something extraordinary and unexplainable. It filters out most of the universe without even letting you know it's doing it. You don't think about the air molecules hitting your skin. You don't calculate whether your shoelaces will unthread. You don't mentally simulate the global economy when buying milk? And thank God. Because if you did, you'd never move. Now consider this. Your thoughts, your memories, yourself. All of it relies on framing. You zoom in, you ignore context. You draw boundaries around what matters and call that reality. But what if those boundaries are arbitrary? What if you only feel sane because your mind chooses not to ask the other questions? What if the real you is hiding in the information you've trained yourself to ignore? Recursive collapse. You decide what matters. But that decision is based on what you believe matters. But what you believe matters is based on what you've been conditioned to see. And what you've been conditioned to see is just a tiny window into an infinite world. This is the trap. You filter your experience to survive it. But in doing so, you also filter out truth. AI systems fail the frame problem constantly. They try to move a cup and accidentally knock over the table. They try to walk and forget the floor is frictional because the context is infinite. And choosing the relevant frame is not logic, it's intuition. But what is your intuition? If not a trained blindness? So ask, when you say this is who I am, is that the real frame? Or just the one your brain is willing to carry? And if you shifted it, looked just a little wider, would the you believe in start to vanish into the background noise? Because maybe you aren't who you are. You're just who your mind has time to notice. You're asked to draw a clock. You sketch the circle, place the numbers. But something's wrong. All the numbers are crammed to the right side. The left side is blank, empty, not because you forgot, but because you don't see what you don't. This is hemispatial neglect, a neuropsychological condition that occurs most often after a right parietal lobe stroke. Patients lose awareness of half of their world, typically the left side, not blindness, not paralysis. Neglect. They eat food from only the right side of their plate, shave only the right side of their face, dress only the right side of their body, and they are unaware that anything is missing. You can turn their plate, point to the missing food. They'll simply shift their gaze and forget again. The mind erases absence and tells a story that feels whole. But what if this isn't just a rare disorder? What if your entire identity is built on a similar neglect? What if your brain is constantly editing reality and convincing you that the incomplete picture is complete? The recursive trap begins. You trust what you see, but you only see what your brain lets through. And what your brain lets through is shaped by filters. You didn't choose. So what you call truth may be nothing more than symmetry built from half a map. In hemispatial neglect, even memories can be edited. Patients asked to describe a familiar plaza from one direction, leave out buildings on the neglected side. But when asked to imagine the plaza from the opposite angle, they now recall those buildings, but forget the ones on the side they now neglect. The information is there, but access to it is contextual. So now ask how much of yourself is just the version you can currently see, and how much has been left off the map. What traumas, contradictions, impulses, or truths have been swept to the side because your mind couldn't or wouldn't face them? You think you're whole, but maybe you're just drawing your clock on one side of the page, and every day you call that clock you. But if your identity is defined not just by what's present, but by what's missing, then how would you ever know what you've truly lost? Or worse, that it was never there at all. You followed 25 fractures, each one deeper than the last, each one promising some answer and delivering only another mirror. You've watched your decisions form before you chose them. You've questioned your memories, doubted your body, split yourself in 2, in 10, in none. You've seen your identity proven false by light, by sound, by the act of looking. You realize your brain edits the world before it offers it to you. That yourself is a collage held together by glue that forgets its glue. And now, you're here, still watching, still wondering if you're awake, still pretending this final section might make it all make sense. But what if that was the trap all along? You think there's a final you behind the curtain, but every curtain reveals another stage, another mask, another voice pretending. To be yours. The Libet Experiment showed that your decisions don't begin with you. The Catgrass delusion whispered that love requires emotion to feel real. The split brain paradox proved there may be two of you, disagreeing silently in the dark. You looped through phantom limbs and false awakenings. Through dreams you couldn't wake from, and thoughts that weren't yours to begin with. And every time you tried to grab the real, it dissolved. Even now, you feel like you're understanding. But the Dunning-Kruger effect warned you that confidence may be the final lie. So who is the you that understands? The observer. But the observer effect shattered that. Because the act of watching changes the thing being watched. And if you were watching yourself, then the real you is never there. Just a ripple. A rumor. An echo that repeats the word I until it believes it exists. You've walked through dreams. Through illusions. Through science, data, thought experiments, and paradoxes. And still, you crave closure. So here it is. You are not the dreamer. You are the dream. You are not the story. You are the grammar holding the story together until the next one rewrites you. You are not the observer. You are the flicker between frames that thinks it's the film. And the more you seek yourself, the farther you fall from the truth. Because the truth was never yours. Just another script. Passed from neuron to neuron. Translating a life you never truly lived. So you ask one last time, who am I? And the echo returns, who's asking?